Before I saw this movie, I was really thinking of like what I would do for the intro of this video. And I was just thinking like, oh, wouldn't it be funny to have like the song that goes "Burn Baby Burn" like playing in the beginning going into this. And then I went and saw this movie, and the only thing I have left to say for this intro is I really needed to watch Finding Nemo after watching this. Hello, everyone. My name is Jake from Talk Too Much, and today my long anticipated movie of the year, Evil Dead Burn, has finally arrived. It is finally here. I, just like a lot of other Evil Dead fans, have been waiting at the tiptoes of our feet, just waiting for July 10th to finally hit. And here we are with the brand new Evil Dead film produced by Sam Raimi, but also, more importantly, directed by Sebastian Valeric. And so I had no clue going into this movie what to expect. Saw the teaser trailer, which looked absolutely amazing. All I just see is chaos happening in a house. You have me sold for Evil Dead. I'm willing to go on board. I'm willing to be there day one and go see this. And even though I am saying that this was a movie where, of course, I heard a lot of hype behind it, but the biggest thing I heard about this movie was just how mean spirited this is. And it left me a little bit of worry because I like my Evil Dead movies to be either right in the balance, maybe a little bit more horror, maybe a little bit more comedy, but I like to have a little bit of an even balance. And I've heard from a lot of people this is just not the case. And those people were not wrong when I say that this is probably the meanest, dirtiest, grimiest Evil Dead movie we've had. I'm not selling you short. Like, this was something where after I just had to like reevaluate in my car, like, what did I just watch happening? Starting off with the plot of Evil Dead, I mean, it's pretty short and simple. This French woman named Alice, she's married to a guy named Will. Will has a whole family, and so one night they're out celebrating his brother's birthday. Him and Alice get into a big argument. He's extremely drunk, and so what ends up happening is he storms off, he drives off and gets into a major car accident, and he dies. And so the whole family attends the funeral, but lo and behold, of course, the Deadites are involved somehow. And what I will say is this, I had no clue going into this movie. There wasn't really much of a plot. So that's like the best analysis I can give you without giving any spoilers. I would recommend going into this movie as spoiler free as possible cuz it's not really story driven. If you're an Evil Dead fan, you're going to get what you want, and we're all here for the Deadites. That's what we're mainly here for, and they deliver. That is something that despicably I say they deliver on. So starting out with the positives on my feelings towards Evil Dead Burn, I think that the look of this movie actually sold me pretty early. It's got this nice gray texture all around that's really grimy, really dirty, and then when the red is involved, it just really pops. I don't know, it was very eye pleasing, but a lot of the movie is mainly in this gray tone, and towards the end you get a little bit more of the red, a hint of yellow in here left and right, especially when the Deadites arrive and you see the yellow in their eyes. It's a nice little neat effect where you still keep with the tone of the movie. I liked how at the very end, when things are up in flames, which is not a spoiler, but things are up in flames and you get the red. And it reminded me a lot of Evil Dead 2013, which I really liked, especially the Raining Blood portion of that. So I have a lot of compliments as for the texture and the style of this movie. It was just right up my alley. It really worked for me. I've heard some mixed feelings about it towards some people, but at least watching the teaser trailer going into this and seeing that, I was completely sold, and I understood the vibe that this movie was trying to go for. Another positive I have to give here is the director, Sebastian. Valerick did a phenomenal job. He took what Sam Raimi has created and directed with these Evil Dead movies, and he added his own creative spin to it, where I still felt like I was watching an Evil Dead movie, which was awesome. Obviously, I want to have that, but there weren't really any moments with the camera shot or anything like that that made me feel like I was not in the world of Evil Dead. Like, some shots were amazing when it came to the fighting scenes and the Deadites were just attacking people left and right. The camera work was done incredible. I thought everything was paced very well. That was another big concern of mine, because this movie, when I originally saw the runtime, it was around an hour and 15 minutes. Normally, the Evil Dead movies, they tend to shoot for 90 minutes and then cut it at that. So I was a little bit worried about that. And while I do understand, I've heard a couple of people say that there's 20 minutes of this movie that could have been trimmed and cut out. I know what 20 minutes that they're talking about at the very end, and where I can absolutely understand that. For me, it wasn't so much of a bother, and actually I didn't even realize we were at the 90-minute mark when that time was coming, so I could have kept going and I wasn't really that bothered by it. Another positive I'll have to give is that this movie does not hold back. It literally felt like the director was looking at Lee Cronin's Evil Dead Rise, looking at it and being like, okay, all right, I'm studying all the material here. All right. All right. You see this over here? You see this cheese grater scene? Yeah, we're going to do something 10 times worse than this. I want it down. I want it down immediately, because they need to squirm at something more than this. And there's just one scene in particular with the grandmother, and it's one of the, I don't squirm a lot there in movies, but I was just like, oh my gosh. And I knew it was happening, and all I have to say is I'm not going to be touching Q-tips anytime soon after that. Now, I will say this is a movie where it's very almost action driven. Like, yes, it's horror and it's horrifying every single second, but it's very action driven. It's not so much comedic. They very much wanted to plant their feet on horror. This whole entire movie, they wanted to go dirtier. So I will have to say, just direction wise, even the script wise, no issues with the script whatsoever. And just everything that they were shooting for, they nailed it with this film. It is brutal, it is violent, it is intense. So if you are an Evil Dead fan, you're going to get that delivered right up front, and you're going to be a big fan of it. Along with that, I really like how this was not just an accidental, oops, we summoned Deadites again, uh-oh, what are we gonna do? Instead, this was something where it was actually sought out of. People were actually looking for this. They were trying to look for these answers. And I kind of like that they try to change it up. Give us something else other than a family is being attacked by Deadites in a house. Give us something more. And they kind of delivered on that. They did a really, really good job with that. And I can at least appreciate it for that. My last positive I do have to give is I felt like we were pushing the lore a little bit more as for the whole not only Evil Dead franchise, but as well as the original Evil Dead tying into Evil Dead Burn. I like the connection that there is. I also kind of like the Easter eggs that they had in this movie. Now, this may be for some people, they may have to have another watch, but it was something that I immediately caught on as soon as I was watching it, and I noticed it quickly, and I was like, if I'm connecting the dots correctly, I think that's a really cool thing that they're doing here. I found it very interesting. On to my mixes. Now, this movie, it tends to be kind of in a sense where the rules of Evil Dead, when you're watching an Evil Dead film, you don't tend to think about the rules. But I've heard from someone that there were some moments in this movie that were pretty noticeable when it came to breaking the rules of Evil Dead, to have certain shots done and have certain scenes exactly reenact a certain way. And unfortunately, that was kind of noticeable. Now, it wasn't too much of a bother for me because I was still very hooked onto the story. I was still a very big fan of everything that was happening. So I wasn't too bothered by it, but I can absolutely understand why some people would like look at one scene in particular and be like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 we need answers to that. Why? What with all that just happened there? What's happening? What we need answers." And I got that feeling very much watching this movie, and it didn't bother me to the point where it just ruined the whole movie for me, but I was just kind of like, I'm not too sure about that. Another mixing, now this is technically a part of the movie, so I do have to include it in here. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but if you've heard the news, there is a mid-credit scene as well as a post-credit scene. As for the mid-credit scene, when you have the ending of Evil Dead Burn and what everything has happened before the credits, you're thinking to yourself about one person that is involved in the house. I'm not going to say who, I don't want to spoil. And then you get that mid-credit scene where they're supposed to be kind of a laugh. They are the comedic relief of the movie, and you're watching it and you're kind of getting that, but at the same time you're just like, but all this happened, how did this happen? And that I kind of wasn't too much of a fan for. I was a little lost why they were trying to do that, but I was just kind of also on the same page of, okay, maybe they'll explain that later on in another movie. I wouldn't be too opposed to that. Along with another, I believe, the post-credit scene. Now, I've heard some people absolutely shatter this. I heard some people say this absolutely despises the world of Evil Dead. What are you doing? I know what they are talking about. And to me, I don't really have so much of an issue with the post-credit scene as much as the mid-credit scene. And that's only because there is a certain, I'd say animal, we'll say animal, we'll keep it light here, where that scene in the movie comes back, and if you watch the post-credit scene, you're a little bit puzzled by it, but I'm wondering if there's like some sort of connection between the two. That was the only way I can gathered with the post-credit scene as to why they would have that. um I think it's an interesting decision, that's for sure, and it only leaves me to where I kind of want to know more about what they plan to do with this universe and plan to expand. Now, here's where to we get to my negatives of Evil Dead Burn. And honestly, there's only two negatives I have, so we'll start with the small one. The small one is that these characters, you don't really care for them as much as you are wanting to. You kind of like know, hey, you're all pieces of shit. Like, I'm okay with you kind of dying here and there. Like, it's not the end of the world to me. The only one that you really made me invested with is Alice, and that's because she is the lead. So you're kind of the only one that she's the only one that you would have sympathy for in the movie once you kind of understand what the whole situation is about. In which, if you're not aware, every Evil Dead movie does tend to have like a theme to it. When you have the 2013 one, you have addiction. The Rise, you have motherhood. And then with this one, it is about spousal abuse. And you hear that, and yes, they make the characters as despicable and unlikable as possible with that subject matter, to the point where you're just like, oh, no, you're dying? I'm cool with that. It's not the end of the world. Make it creative. I'm okay with that. So don't expect to latch onto these characters much. For me, I just kind of was like, there's names I remember for distinctive reasons, but not exactly the positive ones. And as for my biggest gripe and the biggest issue I have with Evil Dead Burn, I have a fine line when it comes to horror movies. And there comes a fine line where if it is just too mean spirited for me, to where I sit back and I get in a really dark hole, and I'm just kind of like, it just doesn't, it reduces the rewatch value for me. And unfortunately for Evil Dead Burn, that is just the case. It is just so mean spirited, it's so dark and just gnarly, to the point where I felt like I had to have something happy after. And it's not to say that this is not a good movie. It is a great movie. Evil Dead Burn is a great part of this franchise. I think it really tests the waters as to how far you can take the Evil Dead universe to get as dark and as awful as possible. And I think they really did a good job of that here. But it just got so brutal and just to the point where it was just almost like I just felt uncomfortable after. Like, not in a good way, just uncomfortable in the sense where I was like, yeah, this is not going to be much of a rewatch for me. And that is what hurts me saying that is that I wanted to walk out of Evil Dead Burn being like, okay, that's a regular staple for me. When I'm in an Evil Dead mood, I'm going to watch that. And for me, I'm actually struggling to find out, like, okay, this may be a movie where I only watch it when the next Evil Dead is coming out, which will be Evil Dead Wrath. But other than that, I'm not really planning on watching this movie much out of my way just because of how mean spirited it is. It does not hold back. Even in the script, it is as brutal and hurtful as possible to where I would even say people that suffer trauma from like abusive relationships, whether it's with parents, whether it's with the spouse, definitely just be cautious going into this movie because they do touch that subject a lot. That is the heavy theme of this movie, and it's going to quickly make or break whether you want to stay for this movie. And I hate to say that, but it's just, again, it goes as brutal as humanly possible for that. And to me, that is my biggest complaint about this is like they really tone down the comedy of this movie. There's one character that is a comedic relief, and even then I can maybe count 3 jokes that happen with this character, and then after that it doesn't even matter. So it is unfortunate to say that. Overall, if you are a big Evil Dead fan, I think you'll be happy with this. If you're not an Evil Dead fan, this is not something that's going to win you over. In fact, I think this would be something that would actually turn you away more so. But I do think that the franchise is still standing strong. I think we are still 6 for 6 when it comes to the Evil Dead universe and their films. I think the spectrum just increased a little bit more on the horror side. But I am happy with this entry. I'm happy with what I got from this because this doesn't feel like I just copy and paste another Evil Dead film. It felt like I still got something out of here, even if it is just going to be a little bit harder of a rewatch for me. I can at least appreciate it and why it exists. So let me know down below in the comments, what's your favorite Evil Dead movie? What did you think of Evil Dead Burn? Was it your favorite? Was it just a little bit too much for you? Let me know down below in the comments, like, share, and I'll see you guys in the next video.